So apparently his dad didn't really trust the other kids. He wanted a true report. So Joseph goes off to Shechem, finds out his brothers went to Dothan, and his brothers see him coming, and they decide, well, maybe let's not kill him. So killing him was on the table. They decided instead to throw him in a pit. And then they had lunch. So it kind of tells you a little bit about their character. I mean, throw your brother in a pit, let's have lunch, let's eat something. But Reuben had planned on rescuing Joseph, but then Joseph was betrayed by Judas, well, the Greek word of Judah, and sold for 20 shekels of silver. And at the time, the Code of Hammurabi basically said a slave was worth 20 silver. In Moses' time, it was 30 silver. But then the brothers get a goat, they kill it, dip his clothes in it, and they use that to deceive their dad. You know, they sell him off to the Ishmaelites and bring his bloody clothes back to his dad. So any questions so far about what we've looked at? Judah, Tamar, Joseph? So, but all right. Let's go ahead and stand for the reading of the word, and we'll go ahead and look at chapter 37 again, starting in verses 31. So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and says, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned his son many days. And all of his sons and all of his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he says, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Thank you. You may be seated. So, notice that his sons try to comfort their dad. Man, straight out deceivers. Well, they're sons of the deceiver, the sneaky weasel thief. So, you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But the story of Joseph, which is in chapter 39, is probably one of the most well-known stories in the Bible. As kids, you know, you probably saw the Prince of Egypt, or no, what was it called? No, that was the Moses one. King of Dreams, yeah, the dreamer. But he's sold into slavery and ends up in Potiphar's house, a captain of the guard for Pharaoh. So we've skipped over Judah and Tamar. That's going to happen in the future. And now we're going to follow Joseph. So let's look at verses 1 through 6. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, a captain of the guard, an Egyptian, who brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house, and that all he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. So Joseph basically gets a government job right off the bat. Potiphar sees Joseph as a very good manager. His house is doing really well. Everything's organized. And he lets Joseph run everything. So Potiphar doesn't even worry about anything except for what he's going to eat. You know, that's the main concern of a guy, really, is just what's for dinner. So he didn't have to worry about anything. Potiphar's name means devoted to the sun. So not only was he in charge of Pharaoh's basically secret service, he's the chief of police basically, but it would appear he was devoted to the Egyptian religion. They worship Ra, the sun god. So Potiphar is a really interesting character. Now, the Hebrew word for Potiphar is eunuch, and anyone in a high position for a king or a pharaoh, sometimes they'd be castrated because their devotion was supposed to be to serving their master. But that term can mean anybody that served the pharaoh. So whether he was married, so whether or not he was actually castrated, we don't know. But that term is used for anybody in a high position. And we don't know if Daniel was castrated or not. It doesn't really go into detail on that. But this introductory section, verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. Verse 3, Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord made all he did to prosper. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house. The Lord was on all that he had. So 5 times the word Lord is with Joseph. Now, it'll also be mentioned later in the chapter, verses 21 and 23. The only time that we saw the Lord mentioned in chapter 38 with Judah and Tamar was when the Lord killed his 2 sons. So a little bit different. So there's something unique about Joseph. And, you know, how many of you have, over the last few years, thought, if I could just become president, I could fix everything? I could burn it all down, and, you know, but... There you go, yeah. But Joseph wasn't in charge of anything. He was just faithful wherever God put him. He's in this house, he was faithful to God. He wasn't entitled like a lot of people are today. Everybody's talking about their rights, their rights, their rights. But what about your responsibilities? So Joseph, he's just faithful to whatever. And Joseph might be a slave, but God was with him. His brothers might be free, but they were enslaved by their guilt, their secrets, their shame. I mean, we just saw Judah and all of his mess. You think the other brothers knew about that? I don't know. But Joseph was 17 years old when he was sold into slavery. Later on, he'll be in jail for 2 years, and he was 30 when Pharaoh makes him second in command. So that means Joseph was in Potiphar's house for 11 years. This wasn't just a short little time period. But he came in as a slave, probably didn't speak Egyptian, and, you know, he probably didn't know their culture or anything else. You know, his dad kind of sheltered him. So he was basically thrown into the deep end of the pool. And it's sink or swim. And he learned how to swim really well. So well that Potiphar put him in charge of everything. So it tells us a lot about Joseph because, you know, wherever he's put, he just flourishes. And God was with him. So he's devoted to God. But it also ends with Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Remember when the Bible mentions somebody's beauty, it's kind of significant? Because as far as men go, I mean, only David and Absalom are also mentioned as being handsome. Everybody else is just normal. I mean, you know. Now it came to pass, verse 7, that after these things, that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men were in the house, was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand, and fled and ran outside. So it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house, and spoke to them, saying, See, he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened, when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me, and fled and went outside. So Potiphar's wife saw that it was good. So she tried to get Joseph to eat the forbidden fruit, but Joseph was willing to run away, pretty much in his underwear, away from this woman. So we get another idea of Joseph's character. We're learning a lot about him. So he was a very godly man, and the Lord was with him. He was smart and organized. He was handsome. Everything was going for him, and he was willing to run away from sexual temptation. That's impressive. At 17, and day after day after day after day after day, being tempted. So Joseph has a strength there that many young men don't have. But verse 12 is very explicit. He left his garment in her hand. Just like Potiphar left everything in Joseph's hand, he leaves everything in her hand and just runs. And the way the Hebrews constructed it is Joseph left everything in her hand and he fled and got him out. He got himself out. So the Lord provides a way of escape, which is what we learn in 1 Corinthians 10, and then Joseph got himself out. So he didn't wait around for somebody to rescue him. He got himself out. So he's a really impressive young man. But she spoke to him day by day, and he didn't flirt back. He didn't make jokes. He nothing. He knows his master has entrusted everything to him, and he knows she is his wife, and he knows that this would be a great wickedness against who? Potiphar? No, against God. He's focused on God and what God thinks about it. Spurgeon says, when I regarded God as a tyrant, I thought sin a trifle. But when I knew him to be my father, then I mourned that I could ever have kicked against him. When I thought God was hard, I found it easy to sin. But when I found God so kind, so good, so overflowing with compassion, I smote upon my breast to think that I would ever have rebelled against one who loved me so and sought my good. So Joseph refused. And the only other examples that we have of this kind of restraint are Daniel and Jesus. Daniel refused to do anything that would compromise his faith, and Jesus was tempted in all ways and was without sin. So, meanwhile, you compare this with Judah. Judah's just going YOLO, just going for it, whatever. A woman flashes her eyes at him, and he's off. So this is in contrast against Judah. The Bible uses a lot of contrasts like this to emphasize things. So whereas Judah was doing his thing, Joseph was doing his thing, but Joseph was righteous. But Joseph does have a problem with keeping his clothes on. His brother stripped him of his coat, and then this woman strips him of his outer garment, and he's basically in his underwear. Later on, Pharaoh's going to strip him and put garments on him, making him second in command. So anytime there's a change of clothes, it's kind of significant. Any questions so far? Thoughts? No? Okay. So she kept his garment with her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant which you brought to us came into me to mock me. So it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was, when the master heard the words, which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him, put him in prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. And the keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. So once again, the Lord is working on Joseph's behalf. But it's interesting that Potiphar's wife doesn't even use his name. He's been there for 11 years, and she says, that Hebrew that you brought. Man, a woman scorned, I guess. But Potiphar, as the chief of police, he'd have been used to violence. Old school police chiefs would have to start in the streets, and they knew violence, they knew scams, they're hard guys. And Potiphar was captain of the guard. And at this time, you didn't become captain unless you had proven yourself. So he's perfectly fine with killing Joseph. The law's on his side. His wife is accusing him of rape. No big deal, just kill him. But instead, he puts him in jail. And, throughout all this mess, Joseph doesn't say anything in his defense. And what could you say about a man's wife? So once again, he's silent in the face of accusation. But Potiphar throws him in prison, and not just any prison. This is the place where the king's prisoners are kept. So this is a white-collar jail instead of Alcatraz. So it's a little different. But why didn't Potiphar just kill Joseph? Any thoughts?
His wife had done it before.
Maybe. Yeah. It kind of tells us he doesn't trust her.
Well, so before, he saw that the Lord was with Joseph.
Yeah. Yeah, everything was under his hand. And the Lord prospered him and prospered his house. So, it kind of tells us that he doesn't trust his wife. So Potiphar basically moves Joseph from his house to his workplace. And so now his house might be in shambles, but his workplace is going to be smooth. So, you trade one for the other. But Joseph goes from dad's favorite to a pit, and from a pit to a slave, and from a slave to a prisoner. And you don't get the sense anywhere in here that he complained. Just wherever God put him, he just went to work. He had his head down. And it came to pass, chapter 40, and it came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, so they were in custody for a while. So who's the captain of the guard? Apparently it's Potiphar. And Potiphar hands these two guys over to Joseph. So you get the sense that Potiphar is still valuing Joseph. Joseph didn't have an accident falling down the stairs or anything like that. There's nothing shady going on. He just puts him in charge of everything, and Joseph goes to work. Verse 5. And then the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream, both of them. Each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with his own interpretation. And Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. So he asked Potiphar's officers who were with him in the custody of his lord's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" And they said, "We have each had a dream, and there is no interpreter for it." So Joseph said to them, Do not interpretations belong to the Lord? Tell them to me, please. So Joseph goes in one morning, and these two guys are sad. What kind of jail are they running here? I mean, you notice that these guys are sad. In our prisons, we'd notice that somebody was happy. That's suspicious. But it's interesting because Egyptians were really big on dreams. We've discovered what they call like a dream manual. It dates to about 1200 BC, which is, we're talking 700 years after Joseph. But in this manual, it has 108 different dreams. It catalogs activities, emotions, and there are about 222 dream interpretations. So they had a manual. If you had a dream, they would go to the manual and, oh yeah, that's this. The good dreams, you had good dreams and you had the bad dreams. The bad dreams are written in red as a warning. So the Egyptians were really big on their dreams. And some people would recite spells when they were eating their dinner so that they would have good dreams. They'd have amulets and decorate their bedposts with prayers, like the dream catchers kind of things. So, in this culture, Freddy Krueger probably wouldn't know what to do, with all these dream guys going around. So they're really, really big on dreams, and these guys are in jail. They don't have an interpreter for their dreams. And then comes Joseph. Interpretations belong to God. I don't need a manual. That's the purview of God. And then the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "Behold, in my dream a vine was before me. And in the vine there were 3 branches, and it was as though it was budded. Its blossom shot forth, and its clusters brought forth grapes. Then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." And Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner when you were his butler. But remember me when it is well with you. And please show kindness to me, make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and I have also done nothing here that they should put me in the dungeon." So Joseph offers an interpretation that can be tested within 3 days. This isn't some mystical thing. He's saying within 3 days this is going to happen. So it can be tested. And that's the difference between prophecy and the Bible. Prophecy in the Bible can be tested. Prophecies of other religions cannot. So when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I also was in my dream, and there were 3 white baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh. The birds ate them out of the basket on my head. Then Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you. Man. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all of his servants. He lifted up the head of the chief butler and the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to him. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So the butler in charge of Pharaoh's wine, the baker in charge of the Pharaoh's bread. Once again, bread and wine. What does that remind us of? As Christians, what do we think of? Communion. Yeah, it's communion. I mean, and here Joseph is with being punished between 2 prisoners. Sound familiar? One was killed, one receives life. The 2 thieves on either side of Joseph, one of them goes into paradise with Jesus, the other one is killed. So, at the word of Joseph, an innocent man is set free, but not the guilty. At the word of Jesus, the guilty are set free. Jesus is better than Joseph. So we saw that with Jacob. Jacob gets a new name and a broken hip. Jesus has a name written on his hip, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Jesus is better than Jacob. Jesus is better than Joseph. Throughout the entire Bible, Jesus is better. And that's the whole theme of the book of Hebrews. So any thoughts? Questions?
I've been, thought a little too about the robes.
Mm-hmm.
Both times. Made me think about when they pulled the robe off of Jesus and were you're casting lots for it.
Yeah, they pull his robe off and then give him a purple robe.
Yeah.
In a mockery. And when you read Revelation, the believers are given white robes. So clothing is very significant in the Bible. And the Hebrew word, like I said before, it has at its root deception. But in heaven, we'll be seen as we are, seen as we are. So any other thoughts so far? There's a lot of parallels between Joseph and Jesus is always better. Chapter 41, then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. So Joseph's been in this jail for 2 years. Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat. They fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second dream, second time. And suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for the Pharaoh. So there's nothing in the manual about this. So if you were his magician or his wise man, probably worried at this point. Checking the index and seeing cows. But Pharaoh is troubled. He sees 7 cows, and the Egyptians worshipped a goddess named Hathor. And you got a picture of her there. She usually has cow horns, and she was the cow goddess. And she'd manifest in different ways. So when Pharaoh sees 7 cows, he immediately thinks of the 7 Hathors. She has 7 different manifestations known as 7 different cows. And just looking at it, at this dream, you've got 7 great-looking cows and 7 ugly, zombie-looking cows that freak Pharaoh out. And Hathor, they believed that she was in charge of creating humanity. So you see the 7 good cows, that's a good omen. The 7 ugly cows eating the good cows, it would almost seem like all of humanity is about to get wiped out. So Pharaoh really wants an interpretation on this. We see the 7 heads of grain, they're looking good, then 7 thin heads devour the full heads. Okay, now we're kind of confused, we really need interpretation. And like I said, there's nothing in the manual about this. So, Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody of the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, we each had a dream one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph and brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. So, 2 years, Joseph's just been living his life in the jail. No drama, just being faithful to God. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, verse 15, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard said of you that you can understand the dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So, once again, Joseph is stripped of his clothing, and he shaved. Now, the Egyptian priests would usually shave off all their hair, including their eyebrows, because cleanliness was a very big deal for them. So they would just be completely bald everywhere, and they were just obsessed with the cleanliness. And, so Joseph is shaved, given new clothes, he goes before Pharaoh. And so, let me see, where am I? 25. We got a little bit of time. Yeah. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed on the meadow. And then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the fat cows. Then they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. So Pharaoh explains to Joseph his dreams, and then in verse 25, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. The 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after the 7 years are 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind, are given 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will arise, and plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known for the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So in verse 28, God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. The Hebrew is very explicit. God's doing this, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. He's already started. And verse 32, it's established. You can't change it. You can't avoid it. So God is going to do this. Whatever you decide to do, God is going to do it. So, now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So, Joseph's advice is tax the people 20%. Usually the Pharaoh would take 10%. Joseph doubles that. And can you imagine what a tax rate of 20% would be like? All right, I'm not going there. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, while all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over the land of Egypt." So Joseph's coming a long way. Once again, put in charge of the entire house. This time it's the entire house of the country. And nobody is under him except Pharaoh. The only one that's over him is Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or his foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphath-Paneah, and he gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Poti-Pherah, the priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. So Pharaoh could have said, "Well, thanks for the interpretation, we'll take it from here." He didn't. He recognizes Joseph as special. You're now going to run it. Yeah, good interpretation. Now go do it. So he's voluntold. But what's that?
Good idea.
Yeah, make it happen. So Joseph went from being over all of Potiphar's house to Potiphar's jail, and now he's over Pharaoh's house. And now Potiphar works for Joseph. So it's a good thing Joseph didn't have an accident, right? Slip and fall down the stairs, and no rubber hoses in the back room or whatever. So now in verse 42, once again, Joseph is stripped of his clothes. But this time he's given garments of fine linen. And it's interesting that Pharaoh recognizes that in Joseph is the Spirit of God. This is the first time the Spirit of God is mentioned in the Bible. And what does the Spirit do? Signs and wonders? We all want the Spirit of God to come upon us so we can call down fire. No, the Spirit in this case, he helps Joseph in practical things like saving the nation, gathering food for the people, so so no one can die. And the Spirit of God can be seen in Joseph's character, in how he speaks about God, in his knowledge and wisdom, and even in his humility. It'd be real easy for Joseph to get a big head, but there's nothing in this passage that makes you think that, he ever thought himself was all that. But, we all want the Spirit of God so we can call down fire, but how many people want the Spirit to help us be a better worker for our boss? And that one's a hard one. I'd rather call down fire. But Pharaoh also gives Joseph a wife, the daughter of the priest of On. Now we know that Joseph is a godly man, but there's nothing in this story that indicates Joseph had a choice. Here's your wife. You're going to be married. But the Bible doesn't say anything negative about her either. It's possible that Pharaoh honored Joseph and allowed him to worship his own God. There's nothing in there that indicates that Joseph was forced to convert to their religion. Now, the city of On is known as Hierapolis, the city of the sun. And you can go there today and visit it if you wanted to. It's their main religious center. In fact, Frank Turek has been putting out videos in this area. So if you go on YouTube, look up Frank Turek, and you can see some of these archaeological sites. But the city of On is where they worship Ra, the sun god. And these priests were considered the most intelligent and cultured people in Egypt. These are the cream of the crop as far as all of Egyptians. And the high priest of On was called the greatest of seers. So Joseph was married into the elite of Egypt and placed among the greatest of seers. So instead of being that Hebrew, like Potiphar's wife said, now he's among the most elite. And yes?
You think they did this specifically to give him some authority for people to say, oh, it's just that Hebrew.
Yeah.
Married into
Yeah, I'm getting there. That's in my notes. No, but basically, if you had a problem, you're going to go to Joseph, and he's second only to Pharaoh. So Pharaoh, is basically paving the way for Joseph. Who is this Hebrew? Well, he's married to the daughter of the high priest of On. He's appointed by Pharaoh. Yeah, don't mess with him. You can't mess with him politically. You can't mess with him religiously. So he's basically untouchable at this point. And, talk about whiplash. You go from jail to second in command in one day. That'd be really rough. But one thing that Pharaoh was very concerned about was the Nile. That's the lifeblood of the entire country. And if the Nile went under 18 feet, there was drought and no food. If the Nile went over 23 feet, then the crops would flood and there was no food. So between 18 and 23 feet, that's where Pharaoh was concerned with. And, so a famine was a very real concern to Pharaoh. They're in the desert. If that river decides to change its mind, we got problems. And there's actually, we've discovered what's known as the famine stele. It's under a pharaoh named Djoser. And he writes, "I was in mourning on my throne. Those of the palace were in grief. My heart was in great affliction, because Happy had failed to come in time in a period of 7 years. He was in charge of flooding the Nile. Grain was scant, kernels were dried up, scarce was every kind of food. Every man robbed of his twin. Those who entered did not go. Children cried, youngsters fell. The heart of the old were grieving, the legs drawn up. They hugged the ground, their arms clasped around them. Courtiers were needy, temples were shut, shrines were covered with dust. Everyone was in distress." So Djoser was having a real hard time. This is about 400 years before this pharaoh. And this still, you've got a picture of it. It's basically a rock that they engrave all this stuff in. So it's kind of hard to, we only discovered it like maybe 200 years ago. It's pretty recent. But he's having a hard time with his famine. And the way the story goes is he sends his high priest, Imhotep, to find out where Happy was born, find out why Happy isn't. Okay, that's, yeah. And see if he can get Happy to fix everything. Imhotep comes back with the recognition of a god that they forgot about. His name was Khnum, and he ultimately is in charge of everything. So Djoser sacrifices to him, and they live happily ever after. The famine is abated. So even though this happened 700 years earlier, 400 years earlier, it's really hard to date these pharaohs. This pharaoh would have been aware of that. If you're going to take over this job, you have to know what everybody else before you did. You have to know the laws. So he would have known about Djoser. And he would have also read about his priest, Imhotep, and able to save the people from a famine. So now he's pharaoh. He marries Joseph into the priest class and puts him in charge of everything. So he's already got this pattern laid out for him that he's going to follow. It worked back then, it's going to work now. So God has basically been working for 700 years to pave the way for Joseph. So is that impressive or not? God tends to work like that. Now, he's given a new name, Zephnath-Paneah, and there's Jewish legends that say his new name means seer, redeemer, prophet, supporter, interpreter of dreams, clever, discreet, wise, heartbreaker, dream maker, love taker. All right, I made those last three up. But it probably just basically means God speaks and he lives. So this is Joseph's new name. So Joseph wastes no time and gets to work.
So they're basically equivocating Khnum, their God, with God.
Yeah. Basically, there's a God that you've forgotten about, and Joseph's his representative. So it's following the parallel that he was already very familiar with. So Joseph was, verse 46, Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now in 7 plentiful years, the ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, laid up the food in cities, and he laid up every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain, as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. So Joseph immediately gets to work, and the storehouses, you can see those still today. Like I mentioned, Frank Turek, he did a video on one of these storehouses just last week or something. So you can go there and see him. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Asneth, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. So these names are Hebrew. They're not Egyptian. So, Ephraim means fruitfulness. Manasseh means forgetfulness. Joseph is healing from his betrayal. And, I imagine he's pretty busy for these 14 years. In verse 53, in the 7 years of plenty, which were in the land of Egypt ended, and 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all the land, and in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do." The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all the lands. So all the earth comes to Joseph. The way the Hebrew is written is this famine covers the entire earth. So all the land of Canaan is going to be coming to Egypt. And they have to go through Joseph. So that sets us up for the next chapter when his brothers go down to Egypt. But, the Egyptian history at this point is kind of fragmented. And Joseph would probably have been in the 12th dynasty around the pharaohs Senuseret II, Senuseret III, and Amenemhat III. And in his book, Exodus, Myth or History, David Rahl gives you these details that seem to line up with the biblical story of Joseph. When you go to Egypt today, there is the Bar Yusuf, which is Arabic. You translate it to English, it's Joseph's Canal. What he did was created this canal from the Nile down to this oasis and basically allowed them to increase their farmland significantly. And it's all due to this famine. So there's still evidences of Joseph there today. So, and what's interesting is there's a settlement where there's a small palace belonging to a high-ranking official. It's fronted by 12 columns, which in our language, that's significant, 12. And the palace was expanded to add 2 identical sets of living quarters in the front of the original structure. The palace grounds contained 12 tombs, all identified as Semitic burials. The pharaohs would be buried on their backs with their arms crossed. The Semites would be buried like they were taking a nap, because their idea was that they're going to be resurrected, so they're just going to get up out of bed and, meet with God. And one of these tombs was originally covered by a pyramid, a very high honor reserved almost exclusively for royalty and unique in this period. Unlike other tombs, this one is completely empty. No bones, no grave goods, nothing. Indications that everything was removed in antiquity. Finally, this tomb contains the remains of a statue of its owner. The statue is of Semite origins with red hair wearing a multicolored coat. The red hair was significant because that was Esau's color. And Jacob and him were twins, so Jacob carried that gene for red hair. But why would there be no bones? Yeah, 400 years later, when Moses is leaving Egypt and all the people, they take Joseph's bones with them. And they're going to bury him in Shechem. So we've got all this stuff lining up, and a lot of this stuff is really recent. 200 years ago, we'd have an entirely different Bible study. But today, there's just so much archaeological evidence, it's just piling up everywhere. So any other thoughts or questions? Addendums? So Joseph is really fascinating. And the Bible only covers 2 chapters for creation. A few chapters for Abraham, and the entire back half of the book is dedicated to Joseph. So kind of significant. All right, well, if there's no other questions or thoughts. Derek, you got anything? All right. Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, we thank you for this time, the study. We thank you for the example of Joseph. We just pray, Lord, that we'll be faithful, that you'll be with us in everything that we do. And we just ask your blessing on the sermon today. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. But I wanted you guys to have the pictures of the Bar Yosef and Hathor. I think that stuff's kind of cool.